We kick off the show today with the senior senator from the great state of Texas. Joining me on the phones right now, U.S. Senator John Cornyn. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Chad. Good to be back with you.
Well, glad to have you back on. It was a frantic and crazy last few days.
It was.
And I guess I'll just ask you this, and maybe you're the wrong person to ask about this. Maybe I should have Chuck Schumer on, but I don't think he's going to come on the show anytime soon. What was the point of that over the weekend of the government shutdown?
There was no point that I could discern other than trying to appease the most radical elements in the Democratic base. And people, because my experience with Senator Schumer is we disagree about a lot of things, but he's a smart guy. He's pragmatic, but I think he just let the most radical elements in his political base overcome his good judgment here, because there was no point. He didn't get anything for this other than the embarrassment of shutting down the government and the harm that it caused to an awful lot of people.
So the deal that was agreed to yesterday, am I correct that this was basically the same deal that was on the table Friday night?
That's correct. Didn't change. And, you know, the bottom line is all of us believe that before the March 5th deadline, we need to deal with this group of 690,000 young adults who were brought to the United States as children, who are not responsible for the mistakes of their parents. Find some reasonable pathway forward for them so they can be productive and have a future. But it's going to require us to deal seriously for the first time in a long time with border security, and the President's also identified these other two issues of chain migration, being able to bring in other family members simply by virtue of that family relationship and nothing else, and this diversity lottery visa, which brings 50,000 people into the country from places around the world without regard to anything, really, just the fact they've won the lottery. So we know what the four elements of a solution are, but and we know what the deadline is, and we're all committed to working on it, but this shutdown accomplished nothing.
Will Democrats accept the four things put together? It sounds like to me they are dead set on wanting just a DACA bill, and then they'll discuss other things at a different time. It seems to me they want a clean DACA bill, and that's it right now.
Well, you're absolutely correct. But what they want and what will get a bill signed into law are two different things. And so that's why we have to get serious about border security infrastructure. By that I mean a system of infrastructure. The President refers to the wall. Some people call it a fence or barriers. That's part of it, but it's also technology and it's also personnel. And that's got to be part of the solution together with the diversity lottery and chain migration issues. Our Democratic colleagues may not want to talk about those things, but if they want to actually get a solution by the deadline, they're going to have to if they're going to be realistic.
Senator, I want to get more into the DACA issue and immigration issue, but I want to go back into the 3 days, the shutdown days, which I guess technically weren't 3 days, but it was pretty close. It was going into the third day. What was it like behind the scenes? What were the negotiations like? What was being said by the Democrats and by yourself and Senator McConnell, Leader McConnell?
Well, there honestly weren't a lot of conversations, at least between Senator McConnell and Senator Schumer, and we did talk to the White House. I had conversations with the President himself about it. But you were correct in your statement that basically the same offer that had been made last Friday was the offer they ultimately took that opened the government yesterday. So there were a lot of people who were uncomfortable with the decision that Senator Schumer had made within the Democratic Party. Many of them realized that it was a miscalculation, and they were trying to figure out how do we get out of this. But as you know, usually there needs to be some sort of face-saving mechanism for people to be able to get to yes, and there wasn't a lot face savings that happened. They basically had to just accept the fact that they had miscalculated this, and there was going to be a huge backlash. The crazy thing about it, Chad, is it didn't make folks on the right happy, obviously, to shut down the government, and it infuriated some of their most progressive liberal base on the Democratic side. So it was a lose-lose as far as I can tell.
How involved was President Trump?
He was very involved. I talked to him on Saturday, and initially on Friday he had Senator Schumer come over to the White House, but ultimately told him, look, you go work this out with Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan, which was exactly the right thing to do, because Senator Schumer wanted to drag the president into the middle of this, but this was not something of his making. This wasn't a Trump shutdown. This was a Schumer shutdown. And quite appropriately, the president said to Senator Schumer, you go work this out with Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell. And so it took him a while to do it, but ultimately he did come around, and we reopened the government.
Senator, I need to take one break, and I have many more questions to get to. Do you mind staying on hold just for a couple of minutes?
Happy to.
Okay, great. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with the senior senator from the great state of Texas, Senator John Cornyn, here on the Chad Hasty Show, KFYO. Back on the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk, 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Senator John Cornyn joining us this morning. And, Senator, thank you again for holding during that break. We appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit more about DACA. Do we know the exact figure on DACA recipients? You mentioned 600,000, I believe 600,000 earlier. I've heard everywhere from 300,000 to like 3.8 million. So what's the figure exactly?
Well, I believe it's approximately 690,000 young adults who've currently registered for this deferred action for childhood arrivals, which is what DACA stands for, and it's very complicated, but this all arrives out of a unilateral action taken by President Obama that the courts have now struck down, which President Trump has now appropriately said this is something that Congress ought to address, and not a president by executive action, because it involves immigration, which under the Constitution is within the jurisdiction of the Congress. So there were as many as 800,000, I'm told, signed up originally, but it's roughly 690,000. But this program expires on March the 5th, so the work permits that the 690,000 individuals get and the deferred action, the promise that you won't be deported, those begin to end on March the 5th, which is why we have this timeline we need to address. So
if there's an agreement on DACA, what would you like it to look like? Does it include a cutoff day anywhere, a date in time where it says, okay, if your parents brought you into this country at this point in time or before, or then you qualify. If it's after, you don't qualify.
Well, I think that's essentially right, and you've heard the people refer to the DREAM Act, which is a much more expansive legislative proposal that has not passed the Congress. The idea is that because these young adults now were children and brought in by their parents, that we don't hold children responsible for the mistakes that their parents make, and so they're sort of in a trap. But in the proposals that have been made, Chad, people say, well, we want to continue the current program. Some have said that, or extend it, which means no legal status, no pathway to citizenship. Others have said, no, we want a much more generous provision here, but we also want to include a larger universe of young adults who were DACA eligible but didn't sign up because they didn't trust the government. That's roughly, I'm told, roughly 1.5 million people. But here's where I think we have finally the leverage to get some important solutions in terms of border security and enforcement. The Secretary Nielsen of the Department of Homeland Security tells me that right now, if you have a 17-year-old member of the MS-13 gang, one of the most violent gangs in Central America, come across our southern border because they are technically a minor, we can't detain them and send them back. We have to, under current law, place them with a sponsor in the United States and give them a notice to appear before an immigration judge at some time in the future. And surprise, surprise, 90% of them don't show up. This is a huge gaping hole in our immigration system that's a danger to the American people. And so those are the sorts of things that we are looking to try to get some leverage to address, along with the infrastructure that the president likes to talk about, the technology, the Border Patrol, to create a way that we're not going to repeat this situation 5 or 10 years from now.
There was a story that Senator Schumer had gone to the White House and told the president, "Hey, we will consider the wall, or at least a portion of the wall." But it was different than an appropriation, and that's what the White House wants. The White House wants the actual money, not a promise.
Well, and I think that's a wise position to take, because if Senator Schumer were to offer more or less a down payment for 1 year in exchange for a permanent legal status for these DACA recipients, to me that's not a fair deal. And so I think the White House is wise to insist, no, we want this money put essentially in a trust fund, so it will be available to complete this infrastructure along the border, along with hiring the Border Patrol and dealing with the technology, because otherwise it's going to be a little bit of a shell game.
And I know you have to run soon, so we'll begin to wrap this up. But and I know y'all are going to get into a debate in this in the next month. But with the 2018 midterms, with how partisan Washington D.C. is right now, do you actually think an immigration deal that actually addresses not only DACA but also a border wall and as well as chain migration and the end to the lottery system, do you really think all those can get addressed next month?
I do. It's not going to be easy, and I think all the time since I've been in the Senate, we've wrestled with the immigration issues and the border security issues, and we never quite seem to get a solution. I think what's different this time is that we do have a sympathetic group of young adults who, again, didn't do anything wrong. They came as children brought by their parents, and we have a deadline. And I think that makes all the difference. And we also have a president who is going to insist on these certain requirements before he'll sign a bill. So I think that makes for a potential, at least, for a solution.
Democrats want the DACA recipients to become citizens. They want a citizenship.
Right.
Is that part of the Republican plan, or is the Republican plan something less than citizenship?
I think we need to start from a position of saying, well, we will protect these DACA recipients from deportation, which essentially is what President Obama did. And if there's a desire to provide more generous benefits, then we're going to have to dial up the demands on our side in terms of enforcing the law, in terms of filling the gaps, like I mentioned, on this MS-13 gang member from Central America, and then we're going to need to have what I would call symmetry, or some rough equality between the generosity of the benefits and the border security and enforcement provisions that I mentioned earlier. That's sort of what occurs to me. It's in my mind, but I'd be glad to hear from your listeners what they think.
Does welfare kick into that as well?
No, we definitely need to have a provision which delays for a significant period of time, perhaps as much as 10 years, people who get access to welfare and benefits, food stamps, and the like, because all of this can be a real attraction to further illegal immigration, and we need to eliminate the incentives and the opportunities for further illegal immigration as part of this bill.
Senator, I appreciate your time as always, and we'll visit again hopefully next month.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. That's U.S. Senator John Cornyn here on the Chad Hasty Show. News Talk, KFYO.